Up until now, we've seen an awful lot of behind-the-scenes mechanisms, options, and other configurations inside of SharePoint. At some point, of course, we're going to need to create a UI so that way our users can actually, use SharePoint. Figure that's kind of important. And that's actually where we want to start in this lesson, where we're going to take a look at site collections. Now, as we've already mentioned, site collections are, sort of as the name implies, a collection of sites. And what we're going to see in this lesson is some of the different things that we're going to be able to do at the site collection level, how we're going to set up our sites. We'll talk a little bit about why we might decide to set up our sites, and we'll take a look at some of the different things that we're going to be able to do at the site collection level. Let's start off by reviewing and touching on what a site collection exactly is. Site collections, as I've already mentioned, are a collection of sites. Now, as it turns out, there are a few things that we're able to do at the site collection level. For example, site collections are a feature scope. Features are different components that we might deploy out into SharePoint. These can include things like workflows, customizations to a SharePoint site, and web parts. Now, it's actually up to the developer of the feature to determine what scope it is they want for their particular feature. And so if I determine, I really only want this in a couple of different spots, then what I'll have to do is set up my site collection structure accordingly. One of the biggest things that we can configure at the site collection level is quotas. What quotas will allow us to do is limit access, in the case of Sandbox Solutions, to different resources, such as CPU or executing queries. And in the case of overall storage for a site collection, will give us the ability to limit how much disk space is going to be used by all users inside of a site collection. One of the biggest things to keep in mind about quotas when it comes to SharePoint is that quotas are shared across all users for an entire site collection. There are no per user quotas in SharePoint, just simply a quota, all users for that entire site collection. So when it comes to planning out your SharePoint deployment, taking into account your quotas and how many site collections you're going to need to create and match up to maybe different departments, different regions, and otherwise is going to be pretty big. Setting up quotas, big part of configuring out your site collections. We can also, as we've seen in a previous lesson, set up host headers for our site collections. What host headers will allow for is the use of a host name, for example, sales.geektrainer.com, to be able to access a site collection. Now, this can actually be very helpful in certain situations, because one of the things that you're going to notice is that sometimes your URLs can get rather long. So to maybe keep things a little bit shorter, and give me maybe better ability to create links and make things more navigable, I could go in and create different host headers. So that way I'm going to have sales.geektrainer.com rather than having intranet.geektrainer.com. Now again, as we saw in a prior lesson, one of the big things to keep in mind about host headers is that if you do decide to set them up, you're only going to be able to do that through PowerShell. There is no UI for creating and setting up your host headers. Site collections also serve as a boundary for, basically everything. First and foremost, they're going to serve as a security boundary. If I make somebody an SCA, a site collection administrator, for a particular site collection, that's only going to apply to that site collection and nowhere else. If I give somebody permissions on a particular site, those permissions will actually flow down to child sites, to lists, to folders, to individual items. They will never, however, flow outside of that site collection. So site collections will serve as a security boundary. They're also going to serve as a navigation boundary. That when I create multiple site collections, SharePoint is not going to automatically create links between those site collections. Now, I could go in, manually create that As we're going to see, I could also sort of fake that as well by creating a site collection actually linking back up to a different one. But all of that is it's just simply a little bit of smoke and mirrors. That there is no capability for me to set up an inheritance hierarchy for my site collections. Again, my site collections are going to serve as a navigation boundary. Last but not least, I can create my site collections inside of different content databases. Now, as we're going to see a little bit later, for different reasons, maybe for performance or maybe for sizing, I may decide that I want to put a particular site collection inside of a different database. And so we can do that, but again, we can only do that at the site collection level. Now, to create a site collection, you're going to notice that we've got a couple of different ways that we can do this. We have the ability, of course, to do this inside of central administration by going to application management and then to create site collection. Additionally, we can, of course, do this from PowerShell. Now, you're going to notice the commandlet there. The commandlet is new SP site. One of the big things to keep in mind is that whenever I'm doing PowerShell, PowerShell is a front end for the SharePoint API. And inside the SharePoint API, rather than it simply being site collection, it's SP site. So if I want to create a brand new site collection, then the commandlet that I'm going to use is going to be SP or new SP site. For my demonstration, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by creating a site collection by utilizing central administration. In a later demonstration, I'm going to come back and create one from inside of PowerShell. Now, what I want to do a little bit later is I want to create a site collection inside of a specific content database. And the little catch to that is we're only able to do that if we're using PowerShell. So let's take a look at how we can create a site collection inside of central administration. So I'm going to go to my Start menu and to Central Administration. And then from inside of here, you're going to notice under Application Management that we've got a little hero link for Create Site Collection. So I'm just going to click on Create Site Collection. Now, the big thing to keep in mind about setting up a site collection is to make sure up in the upper right-hand corner that you choose the right web application. One of the most common mistakes that I see made is people going in and creating site collections inside of the wrong web application. In fact, the most common place where I see people making this mistake is by creating a site collection inside of central administration. Because as it turns out, central administration is really, again, nothing but a SharePoint application used to administer SharePoint. So we always want to make sure that we're inside of the correct web application. So I'm going to hit my little drop down and say Change Web Application. Now in my case, I only have just the one, so I'm just going to make sure that that is selected. Just click on that, and now I'm ready to create my site collection. Now there exists a whole host of reasons to create site collections. I might do this to take advantage of the boundaries. That maybe what I need to do is I need to delegate control to a particular team, and I want to make sure that they're the only ones that have control. I might do this because I need to take advantage of quotas. That maybe what we're setting up is a series of basically playgrounds or different sites for different departments, and maybe what we've decided is we want each department to have its own separate quota. In that case, of course, I'm going to set up different site collections. Now in my little case, I'm going to create a site collection for my sales team, and I'm just going to call that sales here, and this will be our sales SharePoint site collection. Now down below it's going to ask us what we want the address to be. And if you remember back to a prior lesson, one of the things that we saw is that we get to determine what the available starting URLs are based on our managed paths. So the drop down here and the options that I'm going to have are all going to be driven based on the manage paths. And if you want, you'll notice that there's a link there that you could use to navigate to the define manage path screen. So in my case, I'm just going to call this very creatively sales. And then if I scroll on down, what you're going to notice is that we've got a handful of different templates that are available to us. Now, what a template is going to do is it's going to set up a series of defaults. This could create different lists. This could create different sites. This could activate or deactivate certain features. This could automatically create certain pages. The whole reason that templates exist is to help make our lives a little bit easier. So that way, instead of us having to go in and maybe constantly configure everything inside of a particular site collection, we can just choose the appropriate template that will do all of the work for us. Now you're going to notice that, again, we've got a couple of different templates, and one of the things that I always recommend is just get in and kind of go play with each one of them to see which ones it is that you might decide to use. In my case, I'm going to go with the team site. The team site in SharePoint is pretty ubiquitous, that everybody uses the SharePoint. When in doubt, create a team site. It's kind of a nice starting point for going in and doing collaboration with, well, a team. So I'm going to leave that selected. Now I'm going to scroll on down, and it's going to ask me for our primary and secondary site collection administrators. Now we've got a little slide coming up on this in a few minutes, but for right now, what I want to mention about this is that the people that I put inside of there are going to become site collection administrators. Now, the big thing to keep in mind about site collection administrators is that they will have complete control over the site collection. Quite frequently, I'll get asked, well, what happens if I don't want somebody to have complete control over the site collection? And my answer is always very simple, if not maybe a little glib, which is, don't make them a site collection administrator. It really is that simple. Because if you make them a site collection administrator, what you are specifically saying is, I want this person to now have complete control over that site collection. If that's not what you want to say, then you don't want to make them a site collection administrator, or again, an SCA. Now, the one little thing that I do want to highlight about these SCAs that are displayed on the screen here, the primary and secondary, is that these will also become owners. And as we're going to see, our owners are going to have a slight little change or difference than a normal site collection administrator. That they're going to be the ones that would automatically get pinged in certain cases, for example, if our quotas were just about to be hit. For right now, I'm just going to make myself a site collection administrator here. I'll just say C. Harrison, and we'll hit enter, and that will automatically complete for me. So it'll automatically look that up and put in Christopher Harrison. If I scroll on down, I'm then prompted for a quota template. My quota template is just simply, of course, a template for my quota, and it's going to define the amount of space and the amount of resources that I'm allowed to use for this site collection. We'll take a look at how to configure those a little bit later. So for right now, I'm just going to stick with the defaults, and I'm going to click OK. And now with blinding speed, amazing accuracy, and one more time, the magic of video editing, you're going to notice that it has now created our site collection. SharePoint will automatically give us a link to it, so that way I can actually just click on that. And sure enough, there is our brand new site collection. Cool. One of the biggest things that I'm able to do at the site collection level is I'm able to set up a content database specifically for that site collection. Now, as it turns out, there's a lot of possible reasons that I might decide to put a site collection into a different content database. Part of the big reason that I might decide to do this is to help support backups. That as your site collection grows and as your database grows, the time to back up the database and the time that it's going to take to restore that database later on is, of course, going to increase. So to help manage my disaster recovery and my time to restore, I might decide to put something into a different database. Another reason that I might decide to do this is to divide the workload. Every time that SharePoint asks you for a database, it'll always ask you what server it is that you want to create that database on. So I might decide in a high-performance environment to put different databases onto different servers to help support my site collections. And then finally, last but not least, is the sizing limitations. One of the things about SharePoint is that after a certain point, size-wise, performance is going to start to degrade inside of SharePoint. Now, the actual quote-unquote supported limit, if you will, for performance inside of a SharePoint database is 200 gigs. I have seen certain people say that you might want to keep that a little bit smaller, down to 100 gigs, mostly just to make sure you've got a little bit of breathing room. And then I've seen others say that if you've got fast enough disks and enough memory, that you can quite frequently go a little bit beyond that, maybe up to 250 or potentially even 300 gigs. That being said, however, the one big thing about whatever that size restriction is that you decide to go with, be it 100 gigs, be it 200 gigs, relatively speaking, that's kind of small. And so in a lot of enterprise environments, you're going to find yourself needing to create different databases just to stay under that 200 gig limit. Now you are going to notice, for archival purposes, that we can actually go beyond that. The SharePoint will actually support up to 4 terabytes. But the big thing that you're going to notice is that this is going to degrade performance. Now that might be okay. That if I'm just simply trying to make sure that our data is available, even though the performance isn't necessarily there, this could absolutely be a perfect way to go about doing that. Because after all, the goal might just simply be that we want to make sure that all of our orders or all of our documents from 3 years ago are available online, but we might not necessarily care a whole heck of a lot that it takes 30 seconds to a minute just to go find and load a particular document. Now, if you want more information about the size limitations for your databases, you can check out the link that you see there. One of the little catches to working with different databases at the site collection level is the fact that we can create a database through central administration, but we don't have the ability to place a site collection onto a specific database. So you're going to notice that we can create our database inside of PowerShell by using new SP content database, and then in turn, we can create our site collection on that content database by utilizing new SP site, or if the site collection is already in existence, we might decide that we want to move that by using move SP site. And in both cases, what we're going to do is we're going to specify the content database that we want to create this on. So let's imagine a scenario that we're going to be creating a site collection for our IT department. Now, inside of there, we're going to have potentially an awful lot of information. That we might have all of our trouble ticketing done through SharePoint. We might have all of our different standard operating procedures. We might have a series of wiki sites that our IT folks can go in and maybe start sharing information about different products and how to troubleshoot inside those different products. We might decide that we want to go ahead and set up different blogs inside of there. So that way maybe our developers can share a little bit of information about maybe different DLLs that they have created. And all of that, after a little while, is going to add up. So maybe we've decided, all right, for this site collection, we're going to create this inside of a specific database, inside of a separate database. Let's take a look at how we could do this. For my demonstration, I've already created the script. And, well, there's a couple of different reasons for that I'm going to get into. But for right now, let's just go ahead and open that up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Start, and then I'm going to go to Windows PowerShell ISE. And then let me click Open. And there is my little script there. Now, what I've done with this script is up at the very top, inside basically my header section, I've declared out a few different variables. And so then that way, if you want to go back and update those variables, so that way this will run inside your environment, you can. So you'll notice that I'm looking for the site name, I'm looking for the URL for the web application, and I'm looking for the template. And you'll notice that the template there is set to STS#0. And that is the template for my top site. Now you might be wondering, well, what in the world is STS#0? Well, STS#0, as it turns out, is a team site. Now, why is it STS#0? Well, because behind the scenes, there's actually a definition called STS for SharePoint Team Services, kind of on the Wayback Machine there. It's what it was called long, long, long ago. But that's the definition, and then 0 is the configuration. 1, in case you're curious, happens to be a blank site, and 2 happens to be a document workspace. Now, the only reason that I know that is just simply because I've been doing SharePoint for quite a while. Nobody ever memorizes that. You just start to remember it after a little while. If you are curious about the templates that are available, then what you can do is utilize the get spweb template command, and that will actually give you a full list of all the templates that are available. So if down below here, I add in the snap-in, and we'll say Microsoft, SharePoint, PowerShell. And then I say get spweb template. Then this will actually list off every single template that's available. And so if I scroll on up, I can see, among other things, the names of all of the different templates, the titles, and the compatibility level. Now, the name is what's required, and so you'll notice right there towards the very top that we've got our STS#0, our STS#1, and our STS#2. Okay. Just going to clear the screen there. Now, down below that, I've got the two little aliases there, so our primary and our secondary. The primary is just simply owner alias. The secondary, which is optional, by the way, is going to be D. Baxter in my little case. Now, the next couple of things that I've got is I've got a little bit of string concatenation for the site URL. I'm taking advantage of PowerShell here, that all you have to do is just simply, inside of quotes, call out the variables that you want, and this will automatically put together the concatenation. You're also going to notice that I'm going to specify the name of the database using our normal naming scheme. So SharePoint _intranet_ and then the name of the site collection, and then finally my database server. Then what you're going to notice at line 15 and into 16, and again, the little backwards tick there on the upper left-hand corner of your keyboard, that's what gives you line continuation in PowerShell. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a database. I'm going to give it the name. I'm going to specify my server, and I'm going to specify the web application that I want to associate this with. Now, what I'm going to do is take advantage of one of my favorite little features inside of the PowerShell ISE, and that's the ability to execute highlighted sections. So I'm just going to highlight lines 4 through 16 there. We've already added in the snap-in, so I don't need to do it again. And I'm just going to let that run in the background. Just going to let it create the database, because that's going to take it a couple of moments there. So we'll just say run selected, and that's going to run in the background down below. Now, while that's running, let's turn our attention to creating the site collection. So you see that at line 18 and 19. Then we're going to say new SP site. We're going to specify the URL, our primary and our secondary owners off of the owner alias and secondary owner alias. And then you'll notice that we've got the content database, the template that we're going to use, and then eventually the name of the site. Now, in this case, I'm kind of making this a little bit easier on myself because I'm just using the variables that we declared up top. And that's yet another reason to use variables inside your scripts, because not only does it give you easy ability to go back in and change them later on, but it also gives you the ability to have a more readable script there. Now, one of the little quirks about new SP Site is this. One of the things that we're going to see when we get into applying permissions is that typically every single site will have a couple of default groups. That there's going to be an owners group, there's going to be a members group, and there's going to be a visitors group, which will have full control, the ability to contribute, create content, and the ability to read respectively. One of the funny little things about SharePoint is that if I create a site or a site collection inside the UI, it can automatically create those default groups for me. When I do it through PowerShell, however, it doesn't automatically create those default groups. So as a result, I need to go in and set those up on my own, and that's what you're seeing down below in lines 22, 23, and 24. Now on line 22, what we're going to do is we're going to go grab the web object, so the top site, for the site collection that we just created. Then what we're going to do is we're going to call a little method called create default associated groups, and that will automatically create those groups for us. Now, here's where things get funky yet again. I'm not able to just simply use domain/username here. The reason for that is because we're using claims-based authentication. And while claims-based authentication is fantastic because it gives you the ability to choose multiple authentication mechanisms, one of the little catches that we wind up running into is the fact that we need to tell SharePoint which authentication mechanism was used for a particular user. And that is where that I:0 pipe comes into play. Now, what that does is that tells SharePoint, hey, this is using Windows authentication. Now, if you're curious, F is for forms-based authentication. There are a couple of others as well, but by far the most common one that you're going to be using is going to be that one right there. Is going to be that I:0 pipe. That little part right there, again, just simply telling SharePoint, hey, this is Windows authentication. So that way it's able to go find our names. So inside that little method, I'm going to pass in the owner, the secondary owner, and then the prefix that I want to use. Typically what you want to do is use the name of the site, and so that's actually what I'm passing in as the third parameter, and we can see that over on the far right side there. So now that we've created our database, you can see down below that everything's been updated, and we've now created our database. Now, let me go ahead and create my site collection. So once again, I'm going to take advantage of the little run selected. And if we just give this a couple of moments and we fast forward through our little video editing magic, what we're going to see is that everything was successfully created. Perfect. So now let's go check out our site collection. So I'm going to bring back up my browser here. And we'll navigate to http://intranet 2013 geektrainer.com sites IT, hit enter, and there is our little site. Now the one little thing that I want to point out here inside of here is that if I go to settings and I go to site settings and then I click people and groups, what we're going to see over on the left side is IT members, IT visitors, and IT owners. That's what was created by that little method call to create the default associated groups. If you didn't call that, then those little groups would not be created automatically for me. At the site collection level, I can create one of the most powerful users inside of SharePoint, and that is a site collection administrator. A site collection administrator is somebody who has complete control over a site collection. Now, the biggest thing to keep in mind about a site collection is that once I make you a site collection administrator, is you now have complete control over that entire site collection. And there's nothing that I'm going to be able to do at the site collection level to prevent you from accessing any data whatsoever. I know I said it once before, but I'm going to say it again just because it's worth reiterating. If you don't want somebody to have that level of permissions, then don't make them a site collection administrator. Now, in addition to our normal site collection administrators, site collections can also have owners. Now, at the end of the day, an owner is a site collection administrator. But, to quote Animal Farm, as it turns out here, some are more equal than others. That owners will automatically receive any warning emails. So one of the things that I could do is I could enable a quota. And if I enable a quota, then what's going to happen if we get close to the limit of that quota is that we're now going to get an email saying, hey, by the way, just got to let you know, you're about to exceed this quota. My primary and my secondary owners are going to get that. My normal site collection administrators, however, are not going to get those emails. Now, as far as my owners go, I'm only ever allowed a primary and a secondary, but for site collection administrators, I can create as many as I might need. Now, to create your owners through the UI, this is going to be done inside of Central Administration. Now, what I'll do is I'll go to Application Management and then go to Specify Site Collection Administrators. Now, I know that the link is going to say Site Collection Administrators because they are Site Collection Administrators after all, but you really are truly creating owners. If I want to do this through PowerShell, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to call set SP site. I'm going to specify the identity, and then I'm going to set the owner alias and the secondary owner alias to be whatever it is that I might need that to be. If I want to manage the site collection administrators, not the owners, through the UI, the way that I'm going to do this is by going to Site Settings and then to Site Collection Administrators on the top site for that particular site collection. Through PowerShell, as it turns out, there is no commandlet for creating a site collection administrator. That the way that we're going to do this is we're going to create the user by using the ensure user method on an SP web object, and that web would have to be for the top site. And then we're going to set the isSiteAdmin property to be true, and then call the update method to save that change. If you remember from before, when we created our sales site collection, we only set up one owner. Generally speaking, you want to make sure that you have two owners for every site collection that you create. So we should double back and fix that. And so we'll do that inside of Central Administration. Generally speaking, we want to have two owners for every single site collection that we create. Now, if you remember when we created our sales site collection a few minutes ago, we only set up just one owner. So what I want to do is I want to go back and set a secondary owner by utilizing the SP site, and then we'll go into Central Administration and confirm that that was created. We'll also see how we could possibly add in another administrator, maybe just so that way we have somebody for backup support or somebody that we're going to also give full control to that site collection to. We'll go ahead and we'll add one in for that sales site as well, and then we'll go into our site settings and once again confirm that that was created inside of there. Let's start off by setting up our secondary owner inside of sales. Let me once again fire up the PowerShell ISE, I always find this much easier whenever I'm doing demos, just because it reads a lot better than just simply firing up the management cell. It does, of course, mean that I do need to add in my PS Snap in there, and that's going to be Microsoft, SharePoint, PowerShell. So let's go ahead and do that, and let's just execute that, so that way the tool now knows that that's there. Cool. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say set SP site, and then it's going to want to know the identity. Now, there's a lot of different ways that we could go get the identity. By far, the easiest way to do this is just to punch in the URL. So I'm just going to say http://intranet 2013 geektrainer.com sites sales. And then what I'm going to want is the secondary owner alias. And then let's go ahead and just simply say Geek Trainer D Baxter. There we go. And let's go ahead and just put that out onto a second line, make that a little bit easier to read. There we go. And now let's go ahead and just execute that part there. And so now, no error message. That's its way of telling us this succeeded. So now let's go ahead and fire up Central Administration. And if I go to Application Management and I hit my Change Site Collection Administrators, what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate to our sales site here, and I'm going to hit OK. And now what you're going to notice listed in there as our secondary site collection administrator is D Baxter, and that's Dave Baxter. Cool. But let's say that we wanted to add in a brand new site collection administrator. So again, I understand what this screen says. I understand the screen says site collection administrators, but really what this is those are my owners. If I just want an ordinary run-of-the-mill everyday site collection administrator, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that by going to the top site and managing it inside of there. Well, let's see how we're going to do this from inside of PowerShell. So I'm going to go back to PowerShell here. And here, let's put a comment on this. And this will be add new owner. And then let's just come down here, and this will be, whoops, add new site collection administrator, or SCA, as all the cool kids say. Now, what I need to do is I need to get the top site. So that's going to be step one here. Get the top site. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. The way that I'm going to do this is just by simply saying $web equals get spweb, and then we'll use that same URL. So http://intranet 2013.geektrainer.com sites sales. All right. Then what I need to do is I need to create the user. Now, one of the funny little things about SharePoint is that just because you have permissions and can access a particular site doesn't necessarily mean that SharePoint has created a user for you. There's a lot of different ways that I could be accessing a site. I could be a member of a Windows group that has permissions. I could maybe have permissions to a parent site, and those permissions are flowing on down to the child. So that even though I have permissions, doesn't necessarily mean that SharePoint actually has an account created for me. This is where the ensure user comes into play. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say $web ensure user. And what ensure user will do is ensure user will look to see, let me just change that here. Let's go with B. Murphy instead, someone who doesn't already exist there. What ensure user will do is it will look to see whether or not there's a user account created. And if there isn't, then it will automatically create one for me. If there is, it'll just give me the account back. But if there isn't, then it will automatically create that account for me. Now, what I need to do after I set up the user is I need to configure the user as an administrator, and I'm going to do that by saying $user dot is site admin, and we'll set that equal to true. And then I'm going to say user update. Now, one of the very big things to keep in mind about any time that you're working with a SharePoint property is that any of the changes that we make are offline. So I always need to call update in order to save those changes back again. Now, let's go ahead and run this. And again, we'll just go ahead and use the nifty little run selection there. And once again, no error message. So that's what's telling us that this worked. And then let's go ahead and see in action our little list of site collection administrators. So now let's go ahead and say http://intranet 2013 geektrainer.com/sites/sales and hit enter. And now I'm going to click to my site settings. And then you're going to notice right there, there's my site collection administrators. And I'm going to click that link. And now what you're going to notice inside of here is that it's listing 3 people. It's listing Brennan because we just added him. It's listing myself, and it's listing Dave. Now, the nice part about this screen is that it does give me the ability to create multiple site collection administrators, but it doesn't highlight which ones are the owners inside of here. And again, my owners are only done through central administration. Let's close this off by taking a look at some of the different things that I'm able to do at the site collection level. One of the biggest things that I'm able to do at the site collection level is enable quotas. Quotas allow us to control the amount of space that's going to be taken up in an entire site collection by all users. And that's the biggest thing to keep in mind about our quotas, is that it's all users, all items throughout that entire site collection. And oh yeah, by the way, if you enable versioning on a list, that's going to count against the quota, and anything that's inside the recycle bin counts against that quota as well. So this applies to all users and all files. Now, when I go in and create a quota, what's going to happen is I'm going to identify our sizing limitations, our space limitations. And I'm going to be able to set the actual limit, meaning, of course, that you go past that what's going to happen is that that site collection would not allow anybody to create any new content. You'll also notice that there's a warning threshold. And once that warning threshold gets exceeded, then any owners are going to get emailed letting them know that that has been passed. Now, one of the other very big things that I can limit with a quota is our Sandbox Solution resources. Sandbox Solutions give us the ability to deploy out a feature, to deploy out a customization without having to be a farm administrator. But of course, the catch is that we're going to want to have a bit of control over exactly what that's able to do. One of the little defense mechanisms, if you will, that SharePoint has is the ability to set quotas for resource usage. Now, one of the big things about our resources for our Sandbox Solutions is that they're measured in points. Now, there's 13 different categories for managing points. You don't have the ability to configure what your categories are, and through the UI, you don't have the ability to configure what constitutes a point. So, for example, 5 queries constitutes a point. Now, while I'm not going to be able to change that through the UI, I can identify how many points you're allowed to have. Now, should the number of points be exceeded, then for the remainder of the day, you're not going to be allowed to utilize any sandbox solutions. So basically until midnight, all sandbox solutions are turned off. Come the following midnight, everything will be turned back on, and you'll get a new set of points that you can start working your way through. Let's see how we can set up a quota. I'm going to go back to the Start menu and back to Central Administration. And then I'm going to go under Application Management. Now, inside of my Application Management is where I can create a quota template. So I'm just going to hit my little link here. Now, from inside of here, if I had an existing one, then I could go ahead and choose one to base this new one off of. In my case, I'm just going to start with a blank one since that's all I've got, and I'm going to give this a very basic name of, let's say, 500 megs. And so I'm just going to put a little check next to limit storage to be 500 megs. And I'm going to put a little check next to send out our warning email when, let's say, it exceeds 400. And so now any site collection that had this applied to it would only be allowed to put in 500 megs of data. So now I'm going to click OK. Now let's say that I've decided that our sales team might take up too much space. So I want to limit the amount of space they're going to have available. So what I do is I go to Configure Quotas and Locks. Up at the very top, I'm going to choose our site collection. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just simply going to hit my little drop down and we'll say 500 megs. And then I can scroll down and hit OK. And now my sales team, who I was afraid were going to generate too much data, is going to be limited now to only 500 megs. One of the other very big things that I have the ability to do at the site collection level is set up policies. Now, policies out of the box can have 4 different components. The first of which is a retention policy. Chances are your organization has some form of regulatory compliance that they have to follow. For example, maybe you have to set it up so that resumes need to be kept for 12 months. Well, with retention, what I can do is I can configure rules based around that. So if an item gets to a certain age, then what I can do is I can mark that for archiving or mark that for deletion. In addition, I can set up auditing. So for example, one of the things that you may need to show, again for regulatory compliance, is not only just who modified an item, but who read an item as well. So fortunately through auditing, I can have SharePoint write out to an audit log when items were accessed, be it read or write. We also have the ability to enable barcodes as well, so when an item is printed, that it can automatically put on a barcode for us. And then finally, last but not least, we can also have it put on a standard label to every item that's printed. Let's see how we can set up a content type policy. I'm going to go back to Internet Explorer here, and let's navigate on over to our 2013 site here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click my little gear, and then I'm going to hit Site Settings. Now from inside of here, you're going to notice that I've got my content type policy templates. I'm going to click my little link, and I'm going to click Create. Now I can give this a name, and let's say Audit, Read, and Write. And on our description, this will audit all access to items of this type. And then I'm going to scroll on down, And then you'll notice I've got my little check boxes, and I'm just going to put a little check next to enable auditing. And then what you're going to notice is that from inside of here, I can now audit when our items were opened, when our items were edited, and even when an item was moved or copied to another location inside of a site. So if I want to set up auditing, that's really all that I have to do to set up a template for that. And there's how to create and manage site collections. I'll see you in the next lesson.